on the wealth tax, on tuition fees, on private schools with regard to their charitable status, on nationalisation. Just recently, Keir Starmer said public service should be in public hands, support common ownership of the rail, of mail, of energy and water. And then, of course, that changes in 2022. So when Kate talks about people having confidence...
It's almost like he never believed in them at all in the first place, and they were all just lies to become leader of the party, and he had no intention of sticking to them whatsoever. This next clip is Jonathan Reynolds, the Shadow Business Secretary, being scrutinised on the £28 billion U-turn on Good Morning Britain, and Ben Shepherd has done what none of our actual professional journalists have done, and that is actually bring up any of the U-turns that they've done on other things, rather than just speaking about this 28 billion U-turn in a vacuum as if it exists in one when it doesn't. So we'll have a look. We'll see about famed political critic and high-profile journalist checks notes Ben Shepherd on holding the Labour Party to account for their continual flip-flopping and U-turning.
So Labour's £28 billion per year investment in environmental projects was desperately needed, according to Keir Starmer, on just Tuesday of this week. Now, though, in their latest U-turn, they've slashed it to under £5 billion a year.
Let's bring in Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Jonathan Reynolds. Well, good to speak to you this morning. It's not an easy morning for you to come and speak to us, is it? Because you know what we're going to ask. Another U-turn. And what's left of the confidence that anyone can have in Labour on their green policy and other issues right now?
Well, look, our ambition is very much the same, but what we have said in this announcement is we've got to take heed over change of economic circumstances. So specifically when that initial pledge, that sum of money we all talk about, was made, interest rates were at 0.1%, they're now at 5.25%. So that has an impact on how much you can borrow. It also has an impact on what you're spending on the government's debt interest. Similar to that, we've seen the current Chancellor do things like take the receipts from higher inflation, the higher tax receipts, and spend them rather than put that towards public services that then have higher costs. So you have to react to these circumstances. But I would say, if you look at the core of what Labour has confirmed today, it is the most ambitious policy on industrial strategy, things like green steel and good jobs for the future, any government has ever had. It is the most ambitious on warm homes and tackling fuel poverty any government has ever had. It's got major new institutions like GB Energy, so a new publicly owned company working with the private sector to deliver.
Oh, yeah, it's a publicly owned energy company, is it? Or is it their fund for targeted investments to unlock markets? Because it seemed to be like different things every day to you, Mr. Reynolds. The Bank of England will put down interest rates down again in the near future. So they can't keep banging on forever. I mean, Stephanie Kelton in that interview with Yuri Shasford was making the very specific point that central banks are looking at rate cuts very, very soon. I would expect them to happen in this quarter because we're looking like we might go into recession. Not that it matters whether it's like a technical recession or whether it's just incredibly anemic growth, but the massive hike in interest rates for no reason, because most of this was supply chain shocks anyway. After the markets had been steadied after the Truss debacle, rates should have come down very quickly again because the fiscal stimulus had gone through the economy, as had the supply chain shocks, and so rate rises were pointless. But finally, the ECB, the BOE and the Fed have all realised their mistake and are going to go down to looking at rate cuts sometime in the future. So all of this stuff about, interest rates, as I said, and bond yields, which are still around about 4% at the moment, and inflation is coming down as well, all of this rhetoric they're using would have made sense in December 2022 and makes no sense at all in February 2024.
On a whole range of new technology. So there's a huge amount of ambition there. But yes, we have to take heed of what the economic circumstances are. That's just the reality.
But just to come, robustly delivered, by the way. And what else can you say? But when you say you have to take heed of the change of circumstances, you're talking about Sir Keir Starmer saying it on Tuesday. So either the heed needed to be taken earlier or maybe it was a bit late.
Well, actually, it shows, Madra's pointing this out on stream, actually. It just shows how it's clearly a conflict going on in the office. And I think Starmer does support the investment, and it's his handlers and people in Reeves' office. I think I've changed my position on this now. I think Madge is the one who was right on this, in that Reeves is the one calling for a lot of these things to be changed, and the strategists in Keir Starmer's team. I think Starmer will just kind of follow on, but I think he just wants to make it look like he's doing something. But the strategists are just desperate to blunt the Tory attacks, which essentially means that Rishi Sunak can set policy for the Labour Party, and Starmer will just follow, because he was the one hyping up these plans in that Times Radio we watched and played bingo against a few days ago. So I don't think Starmer is the one driving this as much as following. He's just the guy, the child sitting in like the postman pack car outside Sainsbury's, turning the wheel, but somebody else is driving.
We had said, and I think it's important to stress this, that all of our ambitions, of course, had to meet our own fiscal rules. And you don't know until you get to an election year what the economic situation will be that will affect how much you can spend.
Because if you don't know, and if you can't calculate, and you've still got ambitious plans, but are now not sticking to that money to deliver them, you can see how confidence is shattered.
Well, I think what people want are plans you can deliver. And look, any person in this country who is or has had to, redo their fixed rate mortgage in the last few months will know you'll not get the same rate you had when you initially got that deal because the circumstances have changed. Businesses are in exactly the same position. So you do have to reflect this. But we got into a situation, to be frank, where I think the actual sum of money people were talking about more than what you would want that to deliver. And what I want to be able to come on and say is, well, what I want to be able to come. Well, the attention was all on the sum of money, whereas what it should be about is about warm homes, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, floating offshore wind, the things that we need.
That's the thing, is he keeps saying, well, actually, we need to focus on the things we want to do. And I'm just saying, well, all of these things require funding and upfront investment that you now say you're not going to do. So you can't just talk all of the big game about all of these plans you have for the future green industrial revolution, whilst reneging on the central plank of how you're actually going to be able to make these things happen. Again, it's more like magic beans politics. It's more just like kind of jingling keys at the electorate going, look at all these good things that we're not going to fund. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. Correct you if you're wrong, but debt interest are paid to the banks, partially banks. They're paid to bondholders, so people who hold gilts. And that can be banks, that can be investment funds, it can be pension funds, it can be individuals, it can be the Bank of England.
Need to do that, and we can deliver on all of that, but we've had to make sure we can put forward both the way and the timescale those can be progressed on and how.
So sorry to interrupt Jonathan Reynolds saying a bunch of nonsense again, but to clarify, some of the biggest holders of UK bonds are pension funds specifically. It's why there was such a big problem during the Liz Truss era, because they were over leveraged on these liability driven investments, for example, and that's why issuing bonds and saying, oh, we've built up a load of debt that we're paying interest on for the government is kind of fine a lot of the time, because it's just going back into money that's onshore, because they're usually UK bondholders, like pension funds, which just benefit normal people anyway. And obviously, as Set the Shallow has pointed out many times in YouTube chat, the 30% or so of UK bonds are held by the Bank of England. So the debt interest on those is paid to them, literally paid to us. We pay the Bank of England that we own the debt interest, and that just gets zapped out of existence because the Bank of England are the currency issuer.
How you'll pay for them.
The difficulty is when you say you can deliver on all of that is this credibility and trust that people will have. I think it was June last year that Ed Miliband, the shadow climate secretary, tweeted, "Some people don't want Britain to borrow to invest in the green economy. They want us to back down. But Keir, Rachel and I will never let that happen. Britain needs this £28 billion a year plan. That's what we're committed to." Admittedly, that was a number of months ago, but already that has been rubbished because that's not what you're doing. And then, as Kate mentioned...
And also, these were all times when our economy was better than it is now. What's changed, Labour? What's changed? It makes no sense. It's completely nonsensical. And to be fair, poor Ed Miliband, this is literally his baby. This green project is Ed Miliband's baby. He gets briefed against. They all want him out of the cabinet from the Labour right. He's desperately just trying to make the world a better place. And I genuinely believe that he does believe that. Like, I'm not an Ed Miliband skeptic at all. I really like the guy, despite my differences with him politically. And they just absolutely threw him to the hyenas. The red meat to the hyenas just completely undermined him. And then they got him to try and defend the U-turn on Channel 4 and had his own tweet read out to him. So embarrassing for him. You'd think that people, even on the soft left of the Labour Party, would at some point get the message that the Labour right are just like the worst people in politics. Because even like somebody who I genuinely really like Ed Miliband, just getting completely, absolutely wrecked by the spineless and ruthless authoritarian and nasty impulses of the Labour right clique. And it's going to be embarrassing again for every Labour representative on shows like this, because they just bring up this tweet and it's so obviously hypocritical.
And lots of people contact us when they hear about Keir Starmer and the U-turns that you've done. There's been a number over the last few years on the wealth tax, on tuition fees, on private schools with regard to their charitable status, on nationalisation. Just recently, Keir Starmer said public service should be in public hands, support common ownership of the rail, of mail, of energy and water. And then, of course, that changes in 2022. So when Kate talks about people having confidence,
it's almost like he never believed in them at all in the first place, and they were all just lies to become leader of the party, and he had no intention of sticking to them whatsoever.
And what Labour are going to deliver. We don't know what you're going to deliver because give it 5 months and you could change your minds.
Look, let me take all of that. First of all, we are still making the case to borrow, to invest, to deliver good jobs and tackle climate change. That's at the heart of these plans. You referenced a tweet from a colleague from a few months ago. The cost of servicing the government's existing debt is going to be forecast to be at least £20 billion more a year since the last forecast, which would date to that period. Now, we have
that's what the Conservatives said. They said you wouldn't be able to deliver it, and you now are saying you can't deliver it.
And when your colleagues make...
So literally, this is just all Conservative rhetoric completely coming home to roost. This is just David Cameron-era rhetoric. We can't do anything. All of the economic indicators are too bad. The government's credit card has run out. We need to tighten our belts, live within our means. All of this shit, it's just Cameronite rhetoric. And they're just sitting there, interview after interview after interview after interview, having to make the case as to why everything that we want on the left is bad. David Cameron has won. It's Jova. Because they will just all go on all of these programmes and repeat this rhetoric over and over and over again. The Conservatives, they already believe in that rhetoric. They're already saying it in every single interview. Like, how many people do you have who aren't saying these things? The SNP are working on their own budgets because they're an internal rather than monetary sovereign part of the country, in terms of budgets at any rate. And then in terms of Westminster, no parties are talking about the kind of borrowing to invest that we should be talking about now, other than like the Green Party. They're just coming out here with fiscal austerity rhetoric, and it'll just become the public zeitgeist overnight.
These strident tweets, when they make these strident points and they say we will never back down, clearly he's had to back down. That you were left looking like you're fools because you've said we're never going to change our position on this. Oh, actually, now we do need to change because the landscape's changed. That's always going to be the case. If you hang your hat on something like that, you've got to stand by it, surely.
Look, I don't know any walk of life, any business where you don't have to react to changing economic conditions. I mean, it would be a wonderful and pretty easy life if we could just say the cost of borrowing has gone through the roof following the mini budget and that Liz Truss disaster. Oh, that doesn't affect our plans. It does. And when you're in opposition, what the government does has a huge impact on what you potentially would inherit and how you can deliver those plans. I would say again, though, look at the heart of what Labour is putting forward today on clean homes, tackling fuel poverty, industrial strategy, new technologies of the future, new institutions to deliver it. That is all about that. And look, on some of those other things you raised, we're still committed to changing the taxation of private education to put that money into state education. We're still committed to ending the non-dom tax regime for the super rich and putting that money into health services and a few education services too. I don't think it is fair to say, going back to previous Labour commitments from previous leaders, there's been a change from that. I think if you look at what we put forward, but also said how we will deliver it, that is the test. And of course, as you get to a general election year, which we're now in, we have to be ready. We have to have a manifesto ready in case the Prime Minister calls an election.
Super easy to have a Labour manifesto ready. Just fucking blank sheets of A4, mate. That's all that's left, right? We got rid of everything the Tories could attack us on, which meant we were left with literally fuck all policies. No policies left whatsoever.
Moral. And so you've got to refine at that stage your plans in terms of how quickly and how fast you can go on them. And that is what this announcement is about today.
So give us something clear. What does Labour stand for?
Well, Labour stands for ambition on net zero in a way that delivers good jobs and prosperity in all parts of the country.
But not too much ambition, because that would be fiscally irresponsible, right, John?
For better public services, a stronger economy, tackling things like the lack of home ownership and not...
Yes, we support all of the good things and none of the bad things. That's what you stand. We stand for good things. Literally, Solly got that for me in chat. Like, this was the only policy that they basically had left. And it's gone.
Not building things in the country, a genuine prospectus for better public services, better living standards in all parts of the country in a way that can be delivered.
But the Tories would argue that that's what they stand for as well.
Well, but we can look at their record and say this is the first parliament in history where living standards have declined, where the majority of British young people now live with their parents rather than rent or own their own homes, where the economy has grown at a rate which is disappointing by any historical standard, and where things like productivity have come off a cliff edge. I mean, you judge an incumbent government by their record, and that record isn't good. You judge the opposition by not just their plans, but can they really deliver them? And that is why we will never put forward anything which we don't think we can deliver. And I'd rather have to come on and say, look, we've had to change our plans at this stage, than be, as previous Conservative Prime Ministers have been, promising things that they know cannot be delivered.
Okay.
Do you think people were mad that Boris Johnson promised 40 hospitals and never delivered them? Or do you think they're mad about the fact that they were promised in the first place? You know, it's so frustrating. Because if Boris Johnson had just come out at the end of a 5-year term, if the pandemic hadn't happened, and just said, well, we tried to build 40 hospitals and we only built 20. Not that they would do, but imagine there was a scenario. Do you think people would be mad? Well, actually, we got some hospitals and that's fine, right? That's something that we can at least attribute to what they did. They had an ambition, they didn't quite hit it. I don't think that necessarily is poor political gamesmanship, rather than, well, we promised very, very little and we've delivered very, very little, so you could re-elect us. That doesn't make any sense to me, unless they genuinely plan to over-deliver. But how can they over-deliver when they can't even have proper fiscal policy? Now that they've tried to cement austerity in the public consciousness, they'll get into power, they'll renege on fiscal rules like Bill the Hatman says if they want to do that. I don't think they will, but they might. And then what do you think all of these Tory press articles that they're running scared about now? What do you think all the articles are going to say? Labour increased the deficit, Labour borrowing down to the debt. Ooh, look at all of the Telegraph deficit hawks coming out of the woodwork. Like, come on. They don't live in the real world. They don't even think about what their plan is for governance. It was interesting, like Andrew Marr was talking about in that video that I posted on Twitter of him pretending that Keir Starmer was going to be like the new Clement Attlee and some ridiculous kind of puff piece of his on The New Statesman, saying that Keir Starmer is relentless in his pursuit of victory. And I think that is true. I think he's not wrong there. But Keir Starmer is not a political brain. He's not a politically minded person, really and truly, in terms of ideology or in terms of policy. He just wants to be Prime Minister. And he's been so wrapped up in the idea of, how do I get to that position? What I do when I get there hasn't even crossed these people's fucking minds. It's ridiculous. We saw the public reaction on Question Time to this very thing in its focus groups. Well, this is the thing. This is the thing. Is that they actually did polling in terms of how people feel about Labour's U-turn. So there's a couple of things that came out from opinion. First one, most people think that means that Labour has no plan rather than it shows responsibility, or a plurality of people rather than don't know. The second one is that when asked on who they trust on the environment, which is a big issue for people don't trust either of them on the environment. And you might say, well, actually, we'll do a segment on that later, but it's just infuriating, absolutely infuriating, because these people are just completely clueless. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.